Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in internet shitlords. And I guess before I begin, I want to give a thank you to everybody, to all of my fans who have, and I should say fans of Meatball, who have expressed their condolences on Meatball's passing, both in the posts that I've made here and in the live stream that I had on Sunday night with the RPG Pundit Encounter. With Driving and Dragons, and also on Twitter, and it's just amazing. The post, the eulogy post on Twitter got over 15,000 views, I think. So it's quite remarkable to know that Meatball had that big of an effect, and I really appreciate it. It got hundreds of likes and comments and retweets, and so. I'm really grateful to all of you who expressed those condolences, and to know that, you know, how much of an impact, even though Meatball would never realize it herself, how much of an impact she had, which is very sweet. So I suppose that at this point some of you have probably heard by now that Elon Musk has come out as a D&D fan. He has made a post condemning Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast for the language that they've used in smearing Gary Gygax and the other founders of Dungeons and Dragons, you know, the early old school designers that were responsible for everything that makes money for Hasbro, while Hasbro just keeps consistently screwing things up worse. So that's very cool. Some people are hoping that he's going to buy D&D or something. I'm not too sure that'll happen. But I went on there and I posted, I said that just to let the people that are on that thread and commenting on it know that there are alternatives, the non-woke alternatives to D&D, stuff like Lion and Dragon and Baptism of Fire and those sorts of books. And I know that a lot of other people have already done videos about this. So I saw Diversity and Dragons had one, John Delarose, I think Neon and Clownfish has probably, if he hasn't done one already, he'll have one by the time this video airs anyways. So I figured it's not really, I don't think there's really a point for me in talking about Elon Musk in and of itself, especially because it was just, you know, it was one tweet. It was a great tweet, right? He just brutalized Hasbro and Wizards. But I wanted to talk about kind of the bigger picture of this, and you know why they've done this process of revisionist history where they've condemned the founders of the hobby, and why they're doing all the stuff they're doing right now with the Player's Handbook and the DM's Guide. You know, as we've pointed out repeatedly on various channels, Diversity and Dragons actually did the literal count. And there's illustrations in the Player's Handbook has, I think, 17 white males, many of whom are probably not straight, you know, and the rest of the illustrations there are all of, you know, women and people of color, and it confirmed my theory that there's probably more black women in the art of the Player's Handbook than there are black women actually playing D&D. But there is nevertheless this ongoing focus on this kind of this idea of trying to promote diversity and the false claims behind the theory of how that's going to be better than the alternative. You know, here's a quick hint. Going to war with your fandom is almost never better than the alternative. There's almost never a situation where that is going to be a better choice, you know. And I've summarized it today at the time of this filming, but it'll probably be yesterday by the time this video goes live on YouTube. I summarized it in what I've called the formula. And the formula is pretty simple. That there's really no way that you can change characters or places or things, replace them with with DEI alternates, right, to race swap or gender swap or queer swap or whatever you want to call it, characters and things and places, that is going to gain you more customers than you're going to lose by disrespecting the fans of the existing product. Okay, that is the basic formula. And this explains why there are people that keep getting this wrong, because they don't factor in both sides of that equation. Because there are lots of people, even today, right? Like even on the RPG site, I saw someone did a post regarding, a thread that was basically critical of the new DMG, saying, but you guys aren't the audience for this. You're not the audience, And when they're saying that, the subtext of that claim is that what Wizards is doing is getting a new and better audience and a bigger audience. And none of that is true, okay? There's no audience there, okay? This is not just in terms of race and gender swapping, but also in terms, on the second level, of destroying places or people in the context of the setting and replacing them with DEI selected characters. And it is even applicable when it comes to creating characters that have been created explicitly for the diversity quota, which is what's going on in the DMG, for example. So what you can do, of course, in a game setting, is you can have new NPCs, new characters, new places, new things that are, let's say, not white males, right, or something like that, not, that are different, represent a different culture, or you can have interesting new NPCs that might be women or black or Latino or gay or whatever, right? And those can potentially, that's the only level at which you might be able to skew the formula around, where there you can get more customers, then you'll get people who'll be pissed off. But only if those new characters or places or things are not just about DEI representation, about diversity quota filling for its own sake, and only if those things aren't then used to attack the existing things. Okay, so there are tons of characters, and obviously this formula isn't just about RPGs. It applies to every media that has been attacked by kind of the woke mob culture. It applies to, obviously, TV shows and films and movies and any established licenses, video games, all of that stuff, right? That there are tons of characters that are going to be either accidentally or intentionally, but not for diversity purposes or what have you, that are going to be not straight white males, and not of straight white males in terms of places or things or culture, that there are going to be a lot of existing fans that can like those things. But they're only going to like those things if those things aren't an obvious rice paper thin veiled attack on the things that are already in that license, in that story or genre or setting or show or game or whatever. As soon as you make it about attacking the existing fans, you lose the net balance of benefit. Okay, even at that level. All right. So this is the fundamental part of the formula, and the way that this has ended up being adopted everywhere was because you had a whole bunch of these people, all the ones that are, the diversity officers, the DEI promoters, investors in big companies, right? Hasbro is, being told by BlackRock they have to they have to have diversity, or they were until very recently. Now, apparently, BlackRock isn't saying that anymore for very clear reasons, because BlackRock doesn't actually give a damn about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or something like that. They only care about what they think is going to be of the best benefit to them, and suddenly that is turned. That's the interesting part in all of this. Excuse me. That it's very, very clear. It was already turning before, but after the second Tuesday of this November, suddenly stuff is turning lightning fast, right? Like just crazy lightning fast. But not fast enough for the slow pace of certain corporations that are out of touch, and this formula that I'm talking about here, it applies even to cars, as we learned this week, right? Anybody who's heard about the fiasco of the Jaguar ad, that's this formula at work, right? They're going to lose billions in car sales because of that ad, and there is nobody who's looked at that ad. Nobody, right? Because that's the point. It's not, and I'm going to get more to that later, but there's nobody who watched that ad and said, okay, yeah, obviously now I'm going to buy a Jaguar because they're representing me, right? Nobody does that, okay? And that's where the big lie comes. So that these guys go in front of these old men at the tops of corporations who are not ever really very competent to begin with, right? Because almost nobody involved in the corporate world is particularly competent. There's a tiny number of guys that are, but for the most part, these are people who are just kind of winging it. They're not the intellectual giants of before. And that's not just in the corporate world, that's in everything, right? In media, in academia, in politics, in everything. We are now being run by mediocrities at every level. And somebody went and, some young person that they figured had their hand on the pulse of youth culture was telling them that if they do this, if they change a bunch of things in the setting or the TV show or whatever, let's say in D&D, if they add a bunch of representation of black women and Latin X's and LGBTQ plus and all of that, then they're suddenly going to get millions of people, right? Because this is the claim they make. Well, there are millions of black women in America, and the only reason that they're not playing D&D is because it's never represented them. So as soon as you represent them, you're going to have millions of new black female customers, right? Which is exactly where the logical fallacy comes in, And the audience, of course, in fact, the real audience is never that anyways. The real audience is the very, very tiny and increasingly shrinking number of extreme woke progressives, most of whom are white, and most of them are female, to be fair, but there's a lot of males in there too, that are looking to see that cult-like philosophy of theirs promulgate itself. But they're not. But those people aren't going to buy D&D either, right? There's literally no audience for any of this. Okay. That is the main part of the formula, because you've got a certain number of black gamers, a certain number of Latino gamers, a certain number of Asian gamers, and of LGBTQ gamers, right? And all the ones who are gamers already, that representation changes nothing. And all the ones that aren't, there isn't one that's going to say, oh, well, I've never cared about playing this weird game about elves, but now suddenly I see that there's an orc that has a Mexican hat, and now I feel represented as a Latino, so as a Latinx, and so I'm going to now start playing Dungeons and Dragons, just because of that, that is the amazing rational gap that is missing there, right? That is not how you get an audience. And that's not how you're not going to get an audience for Jaguar either that way, right? Like the fact that you had a guy in a dress dancing around in that ad everywhere except in the Middle East where they cut him out, right? But everywhere else he was there, is not going to make suddenly men that wear dresses want to be buying Jaguars, right? And so it's never about that. It's always about making, like, essentially millennial white women feel excited that they're doing this, even though they also will never buy a Jaguar, right? Like, all the people for whom the real audience of this, the things they've done in the player's handbook and in the DM's guide, the safety tools, the enormous number of black women in the art, all of this stuff, the changing of Greyhawk, where now like half of the rulers are female, and Big B is now a gnome. You know, it's all just ridiculous stuff. All of that is being done for a group of people who have no intention of ever buying the game. But what they want to see is the people that do like this game, which they hate, to get mad and to be upset about it and to cry more and all that sort of thing, right? They want to cause harm to the people they think of as chuds, you know, and that's their only goal. And the thing is, if the corporations understood that, and if they weren't terrified of these people, then they would have realized immediately that this is a formula for destroying their businesses. Of course, nowadays, the way corporations are set up, a lot of the people in charge of those corporations also don't care. I mean, look at Cynthia Williams, right? Like, she was there, she had a plan, involved, a lot of stuff that didn't work out. She left, she got a bonus, she left. It doesn't matter to her what the shareholders think. And because the shareholders, the largest power block in the shareholders is something like BlackRock, it means that the common shareholders don't really have enough influence because they can't get it together to outvote these ideas, right? There was an attempt to do that at Disney not long ago and it failed, because the people at BlackRock also don't care. They don't care. They care about having a certain bottom line, but beyond that, they have no special, like, they're not going to go broke if WotC goes broke, right? That's not a concern to them. So this is all part of the disaster that is the managerial state. So essentially, though, now this is going to change because the backlash has become bigger. I've always said this at every turn for the last 10 years at least, that what the anti-woke people, what the based people have to do is make sure that all these people in positions of power are more afraid of us than they are of the radical totalitarian left, right? Make it more damaging to them, make them more humiliated, make it more liable for them if they do what these communist totalitarians demand than if they don't. And that is now what it's turning. It's been turning for quite some time. I'd say one of the big changing points was when Elon took over X, right? Because suddenly there was a massive center of information, and one of the most avant-garde ones. So that's not actually the right word. One of the hottest ones, one of the ones that gets the most attention, that was suddenly outside of the control of the totalitarians, and that made a huge change, right? Because before then, it was harder. It wasn't impossible, but it was harder to make an effective opposition movement against woke ideology. And now it's become increasingly easier, and now it's become something that essentially a lot of the people in business realize that if they, as of this month, right, if they keep going on this track, not only are they going to get terrible backlash from regular people, but they're also going to potentially get backlash from people in positions of power, as the political right has finally found something of a backbone. We'll see how much. I'm still not sure, but there's something of that there, right? So that is basically what I wanted to talk about. This is why Wizards of the Coast allowed the massive slander or libel against people like Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. You know, it's because that they don't understand that formula. They don't understand that you're never gonna, and like this doesn't even have to be about wokeness, actually. Anything that you do that potentially disrespects your audience is going to be harmful. So this is why, for example, making a new edition of a product line, like going to making a new edition of D&D, or like what they've just done now, but what they also did, you know, when they, I mean, third edition was the one that made sense because that was the first time they did it. But when they went from third to fourth, there was a problem. Fourth to fifth wasn't. Why? Because 2/3 of gamers hated fourth so much that they'd stop playing D&D. So this was a way to actually get people back, right? Because what the fans felt disrespected them was fourth edition. But, you know, from the third to the fourth edition, that really didn't have that much to do with anything to do with the left, right? That just had to do with people with really stupid ideas, people who were following the Forge theory. And because of that, it felt like a disrespectful thing to the fans. But even in more milder cases, right? Like you saw this, for example, with White Wolf when they went from World of Darkness volume, you know, first edition to New World of Darkness. Whenever you do an edition switch, part of your base is going to be disappointed. And so unless there's a massive number of people who are like waiting in the wings for a new edition, which there wasn't in the case of World of Darkness 2, right? It was the same people, but you lost half of them when you switched editions, right? So the only time this works is when there are a bunch of people that are desperate to get to play this thing in a better way than it was before. Like, for example, when fourth switched to fifth, right? In fifth edition, suddenly you had a whole bunch of people that wanted to play D&D, but they didn't want to play fourth edition, right? So that worked. So it's that in almost all cases. That with reboots, right? You can have a reboot that has nothing to do with DI, but if it's a bad reboot in some way, if it's a reboot that the fans will not feel respected with, then the same thing happens. It is a formula that everybody who's producing content should know, you know, and it's something I try to keep true to in my own products and my product lines, right? Obviously, you want to respect your existing fans. So that's basically everything I wanted to talk about on this subject. I mean, it would be wonderful if Elon did buy D&D, and you know, then I hope you guys would recommend that he give it to me to run. But assuming that none of that's going to happen, please subscribe, hit like on this video, share this video anywhere you think people will listen to it, or anywhere where leftists will get pissed off about it, and be sure to support my products, because that is the best way you can help me, but you can also get incredible stuff, right? Like on that Elon thread, I was recommending Lion and Dragon, Baptism of Fire, you know, settings like Sword and Caravan that are all very free of the woke influence, right? Old School Companion 2, which are 26 adventures that are all based on either medieval history, legend, folklore, or sometimes even like folk songs and things like that. All kind of a medieval-inspired set of adventures. And all of my other products, check out especially the Pundit Files, which is available only from the Red Room. The current issue of the Pundit Files at this point will still be the Feast of the Circumcision, which is a holiday-themed feast. You know, the Feast of the Circumcision is the 1st of January, by the way. That's the medieval name for January 1st. It's you know, it involves a sinister cult, and it's set in the Baptism of Fire setting. So be sure to check that one out. And if not, check out any of my other 22 issues of the Pundit Files, all of which you can only get at the Red Room. And each one only costs $3.50, okay? So if you can get $3.50, you can get an issue of the Pundit Files. But check out all my other stuff too. If you know, had an interesting conversation with Driving in Dragons the other day on Sword and Caravan, and how you know, you play a Crusader there. You can, you know, in the Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road, I've got stats for Francis of Assisi, who was at that crusade, not the third, but the fifth Crusade, which is still part of the timeline. So, you know, there's a lot of great product out there for people to find, and I hope that some of if Elon posts more about D&D, try to promote the OSR in general, but promote my stuff in particular. I'd be very grateful if you did. You know, and be sure to check out my stuff if you haven't bought them yet. You can rely on the fact that they are not going to be woke business as usual, but they are going to be old school D&D done with a really old school set of influences, right? So like, you know, a lot of old school gamers use the kind of Appendix N like stuff like, you know, Fritz Lieber and Tolkien and Michael Moorcock as their influences. But like for me, my influences are, you know, medieval folklore and medieval stories and medieval legends, which is a whole other type of old school that is in some ways a lot weirder and a lot more interesting than the fantasy sources of the 20th century. So be sure to check all my stuff out, and thank you very much for listening. And currently smoking, or just finished smoking actually. This is a what is this? A Nirup Cuddy with Argento Natural.